Hi, welcome to lesson 55 of Chef's Apprentice, learning to cook like a pro, one small plate at a time. This is the pasta master recipe. This lesson will teach you how to make pasta dough, and we will cut it into linguine for this lesson. But because this is a master recipe, you can make the pasta into any shape. In a later lesson, we will make ravioli with the dough from this master recipe. We are also not making a sauce. There are 1,000,001 pasta sauces out there. This lesson is just about making the dough and cooking it. Making pasta the first time may seem daunting, but after you've done it once, you will see that it's not very hard. And after that, you will develop your own tricks to make it better. But making pasta is an art. It requires a give and take, a subtle appreciation for the texture and the consistency of the dough. This will vary with the temperature and humidity of your kitchen and your work surface. I find that everything works better in a warmish but not too dry environment. I happen to be in a dry environment, so I may have to adjust for that. You will come to appreciate these things more and more as you make more and more of your own pasta. I make pasta directly on the countertop, which should of course be clean and grease-free. The techniques that we use today are making and working with pasta dough, working with a pasta machine, making straight pasta, and boiling the pasta. So let's make some pasta. Okay, so here we are in lesson 55, Pasta Master Recipe. For a mise, we're going to need all-purpose flour, and although we don't normally measure things, we're actually going to measure this flour out today. We'll also need 1 large egg. We will need some olive oil. We'll need some warm water. Of course, we will need our kosher salt. And we'll also need some cornmeal. And then we'll also need some extra flour for dusting. And of course, we have plenty of flour here. So that is what we need in ingredients. Now, for our equipment, we will need several things. We will need a sheet pan. This is actually a half of a sheet pan. We're going to need a pastry knife, although you could probably use a spatula, but a pastry knife would be a lot easier. We will need a pasta machine, which is over here, hand crank model. We'll also need the linguine cutter that goes with it, and we'll need a fork. We'll need a measuring cup, 1 cup. And we will also need some measuring spoons. And like I said, we hardly ever measure anything, but these are the exception today. We're going to measure the ingredients so we get the right proportions to make this pasta. Now I'm going to get set up, so I'll go off camera for a moment and be right back. So I wanted to add one more piece of equipment, and that is a pasta pot. I have a pot here that's filled up to the rivets with water. And what we're going to do is we are going to put this pot on the stove and turn on the heat at the same time that we start making the pasta. And by the time the water comes to a boil, our pasta will be ready to cook. Now this is important because once you learn to make pasta, this is something that you can use in a bet later on. You can bet people that you can make pasta from scratch faster than they can cook store-bought pasta. Now, what's important is that you both of you start with the same size pot of cold water at the same time. Start bringing those pots to a boil at the same time. You make your pasta while the water is coming to a boil, and then as soon as it comes to a boil, you can cook the pasta, which takes 30 seconds. Their dry pasta is going to take 5 to 7 minutes. So you have to win the bet as long as you make the pasta while the water is coming to a boil. So I'm going to go off camera, put this water onto the stove, and turn on the heat on medium in an uncovered pot. Okay, so we're going to start. The water, I've just turned the heat of the water on. We're going to cross that off of our prep list. Heat water, clean surface, I did that earlier. We need to dust our sheet pan with cornmeal so that it's ready after we have our pasta finished. We're just going to take a handful of cornmeal and dust it around on this sheet pan. We may use a little bit more later after we put the pasta on there. Okay, then we're just going to put this aside for now. Okay, so we have dusted the pan with cornmeal. Now we're going to make our dough. First, we're going to start with 1 measuring cup of all-purpose flour. Use our pastry knife to make sure, 1 cup of all-purpose flour. Use our pastry knife to make sure that we have a cup, straight across the top. Okay. Put this down on the surface. Get a little bit of extra flour so we can dust the counter later on while we're making the pasta. Next, we're going to take that, we made like a pyramid of this flour, and we're going to hollow out the middle. Hollow out the middle. Then we're going to take our egg, break our egg into the middle of the well. We're going to take a healthy pinch of salt. Then we're going to take 1 tablespoon of olive oil right into the middle there. Then we're going to take 1.5 tablespoons, I'm sorry, 1.5 tablespoons. I'm just going to do it by eye here. About 1/2 tablespoon there. I believe it's okay and actually a little bit better to have the pasta a little wetter than a little drier. So if I put in a little bit too much, that's fine. I may actually put in a little bit more later because I'm in a dry environment. You can also see from all the things I added into that well that it's important that you make the well deep enough. So take that pyramid of flour, spread it out, make a well in the center so you have room for all this stuff. Now what we're going to start doing with our fork is we're just going to start mixing everything up in that well and reaching over to the edges of the well and bringing in a little bit of flour at a time. You can see my wall broke and some of the stuff is running out the side. That's fine. We're just mixing this in. Okay. Now you might think you can never mix all of this flour into this egg and liquid mixture, but you actually can. So we're going to start using our pastry knife to bring it in from the sides and fold it in on itself, taking whatever we might have on the fork and adding it back in, because you may have egg on that fork and other liquid, and you don't want to lose that because the proportions are important. Now you can make pasta without having measured these proportions so perfectly, but it's harder and it takes a whole lot more experience, and I don't see any reason for doing it that way. As long as measuring cups and tablespoons exist, you'll be able to do this by measuring out the right proportions and making your pasta dough. Now once you start to get it all together like this, take what we can get off of the knife. Okay, and then we're going to start pressing it, bringing it in from the sides, pressing it down. Okay, and keep doing that. We're not kneading it, we're just pressing it together. We don't really want to knead it because the more you work it, the tougher it's going to get, the stiffer it's going to get. But as you can see, it's starting to come together here. Flip it over, start doing it a little bit on the other side. I'm just spreading it, then bringing it back together, pressing it, getting it into a ball. Okay. Clean up our mess here, bringing all of the flour into what we're working. Okay, now Now I'm going to go off camera for just a moment and get a damp paper towel. Okay, so just let the dough rest for a moment while I go to get a damp paper towel. And I'm going to wrap this pasta in the damp paper towel for a few minutes. Meanwhile, I'm going to clean off the work surface so that we can roll out the pasta. We're going to sprinkle the work surface with a little bit of flour so that the pasta doesn't stick to the counter as we're working it. Okay, now with the pasta machine, this is a hand crank pasta machine. We're going to start on setting number 1. This dial makes the rollers closer and closer together or farther and farther apart. Number 1 is the farthest apart, okay? And we have the crank here on this side. Okay, now we're going to take our pasta just going to get a little bit of flour on the outside of it, okay? Now, we'll try to get it flat and about as wide apart as these rollers. And then we're going to put it down into the rollers. Don't expect this to go well the first time. If your pasta is really nice and moist, which mine is not, it may go very easily. But like I said, I'm in a dry environment, and I could have actually probably added some more water to it as I was mixing it. But it's not bad. It's not bad. Okay. Now what I do when I think that it's a little bit dry is I get some water on my hand and I just pat it. Just pat it like that. Okay. Get a little bit more dusting of flour on it. Get it into a nice little package there. Get it flat because it's got to go through those rollers. With the front end that you're going to put down into the rollers, the thinnest. Okay. Now we're going to, as you see, it's starting to come together. But it's still pretty dry, so I'm going to pat it, fold it over onto itself, and make a nice little package again, getting some more flour on the outside. So what I've been doing by patting it with my hand covered with water is I've been adding water to the mixture, but then when I put it out onto the surface here and get some flour on it, it's getting the outside dry, even though the inside of the pasta is getting moisture from absorbing that liquid. Okay. Let's run it through the machine again. All right. Pat it again. Now I happen to be at 7,000 feet above sea level. Humidity here is pretty low, and moisture evaporates pretty quickly. If I were working at sea level, I may not need to do that patting step at all. Really just depends on your environment, time of the year it is. It's drier in the winter than it is in the summer in most places. Okay, now I can feel that this is coming together.
but I still want to get a little bit more moisture into it. And as I said at the beginning, I think having a little bit too much moisture makes it easier than not having enough. Now this is getting kind of sticky. So we're going to put on some more flour down on the surface here and pick up some of that flour so we can work the outside of it. Okay. We'll run it through the pasta machine again. Okay, it's coming together really well. All right, so we're going to fold it over on itself. Run it, once you folded it over, take it in the opposite direction. So it was folded this way, like we're going to put it through the pasta machine this way. We're still on the number 1 setting. We're going to be on that number 1 setting until we're happy with the consistency of this piece of dough. Go through on number 1 again. I'm going to add a little bit more water to the surface here. Okay, get a little bit more flour on the outside. Good. Okay, it's looking good. It's looking good. Still on the number 1 setting. Now what you could do if we weren't in a race with the pot of water over there is we would wrap it in a towel and let it rest for about 20 minutes at this point. But we are in a race with the pot of water, which is not yet even starting to look like it's going to boil. Remember, as we fold it over on itself, then we turn it the other way and put it through the rollers. Right? Okay, it's looking good. Now here's what we're going to do. We're going to get some flour on the outside of it. We're going to go to number 2 setting on the pasta maker. Run it through number 2. We're going to go to number 3. Now here I usually take the pastry knife and I cut it because it's going to start getting long. Now we'll go to setting number 4. Now we're going to go to setting number 5. Setting number 5. Notice we've got some moisture over here. I'm going to get that away so we don't start sticking to the surface. Okay. Putting it down on a floured surface here. I'm going to go to setting number 6. Now this machine goes up to 9. I've seen machines that only go up to 7. We are not going to go to the thinnest setting. You have to kind of judge for yourself, but I kind of like this thickness. It's pretty thin, but still manageable. And this is setting number 7. Come on in there. Okay. All right, so now we have our pasta sheets, and we're going to cut them so that our linguine is not too long. Now we're going to take our linguine cutter, just goes on the outside of the machine like this. There are actually two cutters here. There's a fettuccine cutter and a linguine cutter. That's the thinner one, this is the thicker one. I'm going to slide this onto the outside of the machine, move the crank over to the linguine cutter, and then we're going to bring in our sheet pan. And we're going to do the first sheet through the linguine cutter. I reach through underneath, I grab the pasta as it's coming through, and then I bring it back out like this, put it down on the sheet pan, kind of mix it in with the cornmeal so it doesn't stick together. Let's add some more cornmeal to this. Okay. All right, next sheet. Just crank it through the machine, reach through, grab it gently, and pull it out. And just toss it on the board here with the, or I should say on the pan with the other pieces. This is enough pasta, by the way, to serve two people as a main course. It's also enough to make somewhere between 15 and 24 raviolis, which we will do later with the same amount of pasta dough. Now, as I was saying, this really varies depending on your environmental conditions. I have made this same recipe where I have only had to, of course I was at sea level, where I've only had to run it through on number one about 3 or 4 times. There we go, that's the last of it. Put that on there. We're going to take a little bit more cornmeal and sprinkle it onto the pasta. We want to keep it kind of loose and separated. Now, even though I had to run it through on number one several times, I would still win the bet because the water is nowhere near boiling yet. So what we're going to do now is we are going to break, and then we will come back when the water is boiling and we can cook the pasta. And this, by the way, can sit out on the counter. You know, dried pasta that you buy in the store is essentially the same thing. It's just that they allow it to dry. They stretch it out like this, and they allow it to dry. So it can sit out indefinitely until we cook it this evening. No need to refrigerate it. If we were making raviolis with a filling, I would refrigerate them now, but we don't need to do that with this linguine. So there we go. Okay, so we have our water at a boil, and I wanted to mention that the pasta machine that we were using was an Atlas brand. You can get, there are plenty of other brands out there. And also something about cleaning it. Do not put it in the dishwasher. Do not put the cutter for the linguine in the dishwasher. Use a damp cloth. Shake off the any dust that might be on it. You can use a damp cloth to wipe down the main part of the machine. And sometimes what I do is I open the rollers all the way up to number one, and then I use that damp cloth. I might run it through there, but not a wet cloth, just a damp cloth. Sometimes I'll also run the rollers backwards, so instead of pulling the cloth down into the rollers, it's actually going the other way, so it can't pull them down inside, and I wipe the rollers off that way. Now, we're going to put the pasta into the water in a moment. After we cook it for 30 seconds, we're going to drain it into this colander, into the sink. And now some pasta pots come with an insert that you can lift out and just take it over to the sink and drain it. We're going to pour the pasta and the water through this this colander, and then we're going to run the pasta under cold water to stop the cooking.
because this is, being that it's fresh pasta, it cooks very quickly. We want it to be al dente, which means to the tooth, just slightly chewy, slightly, still has a little bit of bite to it, actually. We don't want it to be mushy. All right, so here's our pasta, and I haven't set a timer for this, but I am watching the clock. So we want to put it in for 30 seconds. That's all it takes. Now, once we put it in, it's dropping the water temperature down below the boiling point. But I'm not really concerned about that because this is fresh pasta. It will cook in hot water. It does not necessarily have to be boiling water. I'm going to go for 30 seconds from when I put it all in, which will be another, let's see, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to turn off my burner, and then I'm going to take my colander, put it in the sink, and then we're going to pour the pasta through the colander. Then run it under cold water. Stop the cooking. Now we'll warm this pasta up again in whatever sauce we're going to make with it. But for now, it can sit until the sauce is ready. Let's see how we did. Perfectly al dente. Okay. So here we go. Finished pasta. Master pasta recipe. Hope you use it often. Come up with a lot of your own sauces.